When Metal Gear Solid released in 1998 on the original PlayStation, it took the industry by surprise. Its impact was immediate and lasting. Nearly 3 decades later, its influence can still be felt today. The success of Konami's juggernaut opened the door for countless competitors. Some would go on to become franchises in their own right, while others never made it past a single entry, if they were released at all. While most retrospectives nowadays focus on the classics, the games that sold millions and millions of units, this video is about something different. An obscure stealth game that had the potential to go toe-to-toe with the greats, but unfortunately, it didn't happen. The game I'm talking about is Stolen, a sci-fi stealth title that dared to dream big. However, thanks to publisher interference, production challenges, and a series of compromises, the game was forced to scale back nearly everything that could have made a big difference. This is the obscure history of Stolen and what happened behind the scenes. To understand how Stolen came to be, we need to take a trip back in time. Back to March 1998, the birth of the London-based Blue52. When a new studio sets up shop, they usually aim for something modest to get their feet wet. A shmup, a 2D platformer, a turn-based RPG, or maybe a top-down experience. But Blue52 had no interest in shallow waters. They were ready to dive in from the start. They pitched numerous projects to various publishers, but none made it far. Most of these remain under wraps, and according to creative director Craig Lee's LinkedIn page, over 20 projects were pitched, including concepts based on Catwoman and The Lion King IPs. Unfortunately, neither of those went anywhere. And that leaves us with Stolen, which was eventually pitched to the European division of Sony sometime in late 2000. Fortunately, Sony approved the concept and Stolen kicked off production as a PS2 exclusive. From the start, the game had the same code name that surprisingly stuck through development to the end. The core idea remained intact: create a stealth game with a mysterious female lead and sci-fi gadgets. Everything else was included later. Early on, art director Jade Mendang revealed that Stolen originally had a cartoonish art style, but the team quickly realized that if they wanted to compete with the heavyweights of the genre, that look wouldn't cut it. So they pivoted toward realism, a shift made possible by their in-house engine, which brought their world to life with impressive results. Initially, it started as quite a cartoony looking game with bright colors and hand-painted looking textures, then quickly underwent a renaissance once the design started taking shape and we realized that the target market would expect and appreciate a more realistic and immersive environment in order to maintain the sense of tension required for a stealth action game. And for a team that had just started, shooting this high was either brave or brash. To bring Stolen to life, Blue52 needed inspiration, but not just any inspiration. They aimed high, drawing only from the very best. The inspiration for the game is the big Hollywood heist movies, the sneak in, the gadgets, explains Perkins. When we first came up with the concept, there was nothing else that was really using it. And they weren't wrong. Stolen's ideas were in motion long before games like Splinter Cell would eventually steal the spotlight. The gadgets, the look, the atmosphere, it was all shaping up to be uncharted territory ready to be explored. But Stolen's distinctive vibe wasn't just born from external influences, it also came from deep within the studio itself as Blue52 toiled away, breathing life into their engine with obsessive detail. The style certainly evolved through development. It started off as quite cartoony, quite manga-like. Minding begins, then the tech came into play. Lead artist Joe Myers continues, and suddenly you've got all this realistic lightning which we didn't have at the start, and that influenced the look. But here's the thing, Blue52 never clearly spelled out where all of Stalin's inspiration came from. Yes, Perkins mentioned Hollywood heist movies, but which ones exactly? To answer that, you'll need to dig deeper than a casual Google search. Fortunately, if you look closely enough, the clues are there. For starters, art director Graham Puttock cited Blade Runner and Gotham City as major influences on the game's visual identity. The dramatic use of lightning and shadow wasn't just an aesthetic choice, it was essential for the kind of experience Blue52 was aiming to make. In another early interview, Jonathan Beadle revealed two cinematic touchstones that shaped Stalin at its core: Entrapment and the Thomas Crown Affair. Stalin was inspired by Hollywood heist and thief films such as Entrapment and the Thomas Crown Affair. The gameplay possibilities of a thief planning a job and then executing it by stylishly outdoing high-tech security measures immediately struck a chord with everyone, and Stalin was born. While development kicked off in early 2001, Stalin wouldn't be officially announced until July 28, 2003. As covered earlier, Blue52 had signed a deal with Sony Computer Entertainment Europe to develop a new stealth IP featuring an original and appealing female lead. At first, everything appeared to be running smoothly. Blue52 was hard at work and Sony was footing the bill. Development was underway and the waters seemed calm. But just a month later, Eurogamer reported that Blue52 refused to confirm whether they were even working on a Sony project or if it would release at all. So what happened? Was Stalin a hoax? Just a flashy pitch that never left the drawing board? No, Stalin was real, but behind the scenes there was confusion, a lot of it, and that fog of uncertainty would linger for months. The next time anyone would hear about Stalin again was in March 2004, when it was announced that Sony had dropped the project entirely. Many would assume this was normal. Sony likely didn't see the potential and quietly moved on. That is the story the average observer would believe, but the truth, it's far more complicated, and that is a story for later. After Sony pulled out, Blue52 had just 3 months to find a new publisher, or risk losing everything. The clock was ticking, and Blue52 had to think and move fast. What began as a bold, ambitious vision was now spiraling into something far more desperate. And sure enough, just 3 months later, Blue52 signed a deal with Hip Interactive. The deal with Hip Interactive also meant that the game was no longer a PS2 exclusive. The studio had been saved, or so everyone thought. Once Blue52 signed with Hip Interactive, Stalin began to surface. Marketing materials started to roll out, magazine print ads, developer written diaries, interviews, and trailers. The game even found its way into high-profile publications like the official UK PlayStation magazine and Edge. To boost recognition even further, a standalone comic was released, not just to promote the game but to provide a brief backstory for Anya Romanov, Stalin's main protagonist. Everything was going smoothly, and according to one of Eurogamer's articles, Stalin was set to release in March 2005. Before I jump to the next section, I wanted to cover the beta content of the game. The first glimpse of the game's beta content comes from a design document shared with me by Rudolf Kremers. He explained that one of the earliest levels Blue52 experimented with was a test VR stage, though not an actual VR level in the traditional sense. Rather, it served as a conceptual playground where the team could toy with ideas and mechanics before anything was fully realized. These experimental spaces never made it into the final game, but they laid the groundwork for what was to come. He also said that a beta build dating to 2002 with various differences exists. While looking deeper, we can also observe a finishing move by Anya that didn't make it into the final game. Anya would wrap her legs around an enemy and bring them down in a stylish finesse. There is more beta content that we will likely never get to see, such as this. Originally, the first guards carried batons, and we discovered very quickly that due to Anya's athleticism, it was easy to stalemate them and leave, so now at least they can shoot you off. On another website, Jonathan Beadle revealed that Stolen was once planned as an open-world game. The early designs of Stolen had a full, free-roaming living city in which you could break into any building you wanted, steal whatever you could find, and sell it to the highest bidder. Jonathan states, like a classic Heist movie, you'd stake out buildings from afar, investigate the security system's weaknesses with your contacts, influence, or manipulate the security staff within, or survey the inside of the target building the day before the job. However, this idea has proven to be taxing for the PS2, as Jonathan Beadle would eventually reveal. While some of this has since been proven to be possible, at the time we came to open our first PS2 development kit, it was clearly beyond what the PS2 was capable of. Since that day, Stolen had been broken down into its core components and reformed and streamlined many times over into a more focused and more cohesive experience. In a conversation with designer Rudolf Kremers, he also revealed that a chunk of planned levels was deleted to get the game out the door, including an embassy and a huge dam level. When March 2005 rolled around, the unthinkable happened. Blue52 announced that it was closing its doors forever, with the threat of cancellation looming over Stolen. A handful of determined developers regrouped, relocated to a new office, and managed to finish the game. After nearly 4 years in development, Stolen was finally released. Originally slated for a March 2005 launch, it was pushed slightly to April, arriving globally on PlayStation 2, Xbox, and PC. But then came the inevitable question: did anyone actually care? Did anyone appreciate what Stolen was trying to do? The answer sadly was no. The game barely made a dent. Only a small percentage of players appreciated what Stolen aimed to achieve. The game wasn't a commercial success, and its reception was mixed at best. Criticism came from all directions. Some dismissed it as just another generic action adventure. Others weighed it with unrealistic expectations. The combat, story, and environment's design all came under fire from critics and players, and to twist the knife even deeper, Stolen was relentlessly compared to Splinter Cell, Metal Gear Solid, and Thief, a harsh and arguably unfair standard for a debut title from a small studio. In the end, Stolen vanished as quickly as it appeared, lost in the shuffle as the industry marched forward without a second glance. But while it may seem like Blue52 spent 4 years making a game, the truth is, they were fighting a very different kind of war behind the scenes. So far, we know how Stolen began. Blue52 pitched the idea to Sony, and Sony Computer Entertainment Europe saw potential in it. Everything seemed to be sailing smoothly until the ship struck an iceberg, and from there, it all began to sink. But what exactly happened? The answer lies with Jade Mendang. In my pursuit to uncover what truly went on behind the scenes, I reached out to him directly, and honestly, it doesn't take a genius to spot the warning signs. Delayed release windows, total radio silence in the press until a year before launch, a sudden switch in publisher, sudden members at Blue52 leaving, and a string of other red flags. First, let's start with the basics. According to Jade Mindang, Stolen was originally pitched to Sony Computer Entertainment Europe as a fun, stealth game built around futuristic gadgets and a compelling female lead. We sold the project to Sony Computer Entertainment Europe on the basis of it being a stealth game, the plucky underdog with a few high-tech gadgets at her disposal, thanks to her geek mentor and supporter. He was potentially an ex-CIA FBI burnout. We never wanted to go deep into Louis' background. He was just an archetype. But things took a sharp turn. An assistant producer, whose name Mindang didn't reveal, began steering the project away from its original identity, pushing for James Bond-inspired experience, with more guns, more spectacle, and a heavier focus on action. However, this assistant producer pushed us towards being high budget in terms of our design thinking, Jade reveals. I mean in concept rather than an actual budget, because of course our actual budget and schedule didn't actually change from our originally proposed development schedule, except when it had to, because he didn't appear to be aware of any accountability on his own part for his micromanaging us towards months of extra work towards fulfilling his ambition to making Stolen more like a James Bond-esque type premise. Blue52 followed his lead. They even drew up concept art and plans for underwater base, one of many flashy additions made solely at the producer's request. We even did a concept art and plans for underwater base at his behest, Jade revealed. But there was a price for following his direction. When Sony's leadership finally reviewed the project after 2 deadlines and a budget extension, Phil Harrison harshly criticized the game's direction for straying too far from the original pitch. When the project came under review by Sony leadership, Phil Harrison literally criticized us for not fulfilling the original project pitch in which he had been present by calling it almost James Bond-esque in its scope and themes. At which point we looked across the boardroom at this little guy of a producer who was just looking at his shoes, leaving us hanging to take the blame for his project management. After that brutal review, Blue52 was put on a short leash, given an ultimatum to finish the project on the current schedule and budget. No exceptions. We weren't entirely blameless, Jade admitted. Our founding design director completely folded to that Sony Computer Entertainment Europe producer, letting him run roughshod over our design. That is why he was eventually let go, and I was installed as the new project director. But still, there was no acknowledgement over the producer's role in inflating our workload and manpower costs. With Jade now at the helm, Blue52 began resisting the producer's overreach. That resistance, as it turned out, would be the final straw in their relationship with Sony. So when I was the new point of contact and responsible for bringing the project to market, I did indeed start resisting this producer's overtures to vicariously design the game as if we were still on an open-ended budget and schedule. Jade reveals, we obviously came to blows and ultimately it led to Sony canning us out and our eventual resigning with HIP Interactive. To this day, I don't think Sony Computer Entertainment Europe ever acknowledged their part in the poor management of that project and the ultimate failure of the development process to meet their own expectations. We only ever did what they told us, right up until the point where we could no longer do so because their own left hand did not communicate with their own right hand, and we found ourselves with few allies within their political structure. Cutting ties with Sony and signing with HIP Interactive seemed like a relief at first. For a brief moment it felt like Blue52 had found solid ground again, but that calm wouldn't last long. A new publisher brought new challenges, and the next chapter in Stolen's troubled development would prove just as turbulent. Once we were signed with Hip Interactive, their marketing department decided they couldn't market such a game without having guns in it. Our protests about guns made the whole requirement for stealth, that being the whole core gameplay of the project, somewhat redundant if you can shoot your way out of problems. The whole point of Stolen was, as shown in early trailers, to infiltrate, steal, and vanish. No lethal guns, no combat, just pure stealth. But Hip Interactive didn't bond with the idea. It fell on deaf ears, Jade recalls, so we negotiated them down to a non-lethal laser pistol which would only temporarily get you out of a tight spot but ultimately raise the alarm on a delayed basis once the guard regained consciousness. But it was a last-minute patch to the gameplay which obviously didn't really work as elegantly as the core gameplay we had been working towards for 3 years at that point. Once Hip Interactive and Blue52 finally agreed on how to implement a defense system without resorting to lethal moves or firearms, all that remained was the marketing. But Blue52's split with Sony Computer Entertainment Europe came at a cost. They had lost a powerful force that could have made a massive impact on Stolen's visibility. Still, as Jade Mendang made clear, working with Sony Computer Entertainment Europe had been nothing short of a nightmare. Their only real option was to stick with Hip Interactive and see it through to the end. Hip Interactive seemed a little green when it came to game publishing, Jade recalled. Their parent company had made its money in DVD distribution and online media sales, but publishing and supporting live game development, that was a new trick for them. After years of blood, sweat, and design compromises, their marketing push from Hip landed like a damp squib. We were somewhat aghast at how poor their entire marketing strategy was for the game. It amounted to a couple of full-page ads in game magazines and having me do 50 online interviews with websites, which obviously cost them nothing but ate up a ton of my time when we were still trying to polish the game. In a last-ditch effort to put Stolen on the map, Blue52 came up with a free 15-page comic. Unfortunately, such effort didn't move the needle much, but it still spoke volumes about how much the team still cared. The comic was our idea, Jade explained, because we had comic-capable concept artists sitting around almost idle at that stage, and a great script writer I brought in to simplify and streamline the game's plot after our split with Sony Computer Entertainment Europe. Hip paid to print it, but we organized the whole thing as a last-ditch attempt to build buzz and reach our audience in a medium they'd actually appreciate. Even in the final stretch, with resources dwindling and time shrinking, Blue52 poured whatever they had left into making Stolen stand out. And while the comic may not have sparked a wildfire of hype, it remains a symbol of a team trying to salvage something meaningful from a game they still believed in. But still, were there ever plans for a Stolen sequel after everything that happened? Unfortunately, no. As we've seen previously, Blue52 was already gone long before Stolen was released, or as Rudolf Kremers said, the game was released in a guerrilla top-secret style. To make matters worse, as Jade Mendang revealed, the rights to Stolen had been sold to Hip Interactive, and with Hip going bankrupt just a few years later, the IP fell into legal limbo. No one knows who owns it now, or if anyone will care enough to do something with it.
Stone.